Look, I need you to imagine something with me for a second. It's 2019, you're sitting in your living room, and someone walks in and tells you, hey, in the next 5 years, we're going to shut down the entire global economy for months, print more money than we've printed in the previous century combined, raise interest rates faster than we have since the 1980s, and rack up another $10 trillion in government debt. What would you have said? You probably would have said, the economy is going to collapse, right? Stock market's done. Housing market's going to crash. We're talking Great Depression 2.0. But here we are in 2026, and the S&P 500 just hit another all-time high last week. Unemployment's at 4.1%. People are still buying $8 lattes. So what the hell is going on? Why hasn't everything fallen apart yet? And more importantly, and this is what we're really going to dig into today, does yet mean something, or are we actually missing what's really happening? Here's the thing that most people don't understand about economic collapses. They don't look like what you think they're going to look like. When most people imagine an economic collapse, they're picturing 1929, right? Stock market crashes 89%, bread lines around the block, everyone loses everything overnight. Very dramatic, very obvious. But that's not how modern economies break. And that's exactly why so many people are confused right now. See, we've been hearing predictions of economic doom for years now. I mean, go back and look at the headlines from 2021, inflation's gonna destroy us. 2022, these interest rate hikes are gonna crash everything. 2023, the banking crisis is just beginning. 2024, commercial real estate is gonna take down the whole system. And yet, here we are, still standing. Now, you might be thinking, okay, Brian, so were all those people just wrong? Is everything actually fine? And that's where this gets really interesting, because the answer is both yes and no, and understanding why is going to completely change how you think about your money, your investments, and your financial future. Because here's what most people don't realize. We're not in a traditional economic situation anymore. The rules have changed. The game is different. And if you're still playing by the old playbook, you're going to get destroyed. You just don't know it yet. All right, let's start with the math, because the numbers are absolutely insane. The US national debt right now is sitting at about $36 trillion. Just to put that in perspective, in the year 2000, that's only 26 years ago, it was $5.7 trillion. We've added more than $30 trillion in debt in just over 2 decades. But here's where it gets really crazy. According to the Congressional Budget Office, we're paying about $950 billion per year just in interest on that debt. That's nearly $1 trillion that's not going to infrastructure, not going to social programs, not going to defense, just interest payments. To put that in terms, you can actually wrap your head around. That's more than we spend on all of K-12 education nationwide, more than we spend on transportation. We're literally paying more just to service our debt than we're spending on entire government departments. Now, in your personal life, if you were spending $950 out of every $5,000 you made just on interest payments, you'd be panicking, right? You'd be calling that a crisis. You'd be cutting up credit cards and selling stuff. But the government's just like, yeah, this is fine. Let's add some more. And look, I'm not trying to be political here. This isn't about Democrats or Republicans. This is pure math. Both parties have added to this debt. This is a bipartisan disaster. Here's another number that should terrify you. M2 money supply. Don't worry if you don't know what that is. Basically, it's a measure of how much money exists in the economy. In February 2020, M2 was about $15.5 trillion. By April 2022, it was $21.7 trillion. We increased the money supply by 40% in 2 years. 40%. Think about that in terms of a pizza. Imagine you and 5 friends are splitting a pizza, and you each get about 1.67 slices. Then suddenly, without making the pizza any bigger, 3 more people show up. Now, you're each getting about 1.25 slices, same pizza, more people, everyone gets less. That's inflation. That's what we did to the dollar. And yet, the economy hasn't collapsed. Why? This is where it gets really interesting because there are basically three pillars that are preventing the collapse everyone keeps predicting, and understanding these is crucial. Pillar number one, the dollar's reserve currency status. Here's what most people don't realize. We have a cheat code that almost no other country has. The US dollar is the world's reserve currency. That means when countries trade with each other, even if it's Japan trading with Germany, they usually do it in dollars. According to the International Monetary Fund, about 59% of all global central bank reserves are held in US dollars. The next closest is the euro at like 20%. What does this mean practically? It means the entire world has to keep buying dollars, which creates this massive constant demand for our currency. It's like, imagine if you owned a store, but you also controlled the money that people had to use in your store. That's kind of the position the US is in. So even when we print trillions of dollars, there's still global demand soaking it up. Like other countries need dollars to function. It's not sustainable forever, and I'll get to that, but it's buying us time. Pillar number two, the Federal Reserve's interventionism. Look, love it or hate it, the Fed has gotten really good at one thing, preventing immediate catastrophes. Remember March 2020? The stock market crashed 34% in like 5 weeks. Fastest crash in history. The Fed came in with $4 trillion in emergency programs, slashed interest rates to zero, bought corporate bonds for the first time ever. Or remember March 2023, Silicon Valley Bank collapsed, Signature Bank collapsed. We were staring down a potential banking crisis. The Fed created a new emergency lending program basically overnight. Guaranteed deposits stopped the panic. Now, you might be thinking, Brian, but isn't that just kicking the can down the road? Yes, absolutely yes, that's exactly what it is. But here's the thing. Kicking the can down the road works until you run out of road. And we don't know how much road is left. That's the scary part. But in the short term, the Fed has essentially said, we will not let things collapse. We will print money. We will backstop banks. We will do whatever it takes. And so far, they've been able to do it. Pillar number three, the psychological shift. This is the one that nobody talks about, and it's arguably the most important. Here's the thing. Economic collapses are as much about psychology as they are about math. The Great Depression wasn't just about stock prices falling. It was about everyone simultaneously losing confidence and pulling their money out of everything. But we've psychologically adapted to insanity. Things that would have caused mass panic 20 years ago barely make the news now. Government shuts down for weeks? Hey, happens every few years. Debt ceiling crisis? They'll figure it out. They always do. Another bank fails? Well, my deposits are FDIC insured, so we've normalized economic chaos, and as long as people believe things are fine, as long as they keep spending, keep investing, keep participating in the economy, things kind of stay fine. It's this weird self-fulfilling prophecy. The stock market is literally at all-time highs right now, even though by traditional valuation metrics, stocks are wildly overpriced. The S&P 500's price-to-earnings ratio is around 25 to 26, when the historical average is more like 15 to 16. But people keep buying because they believe it'll keep going up. And you know what? As long as they believe that, it does keep going up. Now, here's where I need you to pay very close attention, because this is where the yet in our title comes in. Just because something hasn't collapsed doesn't mean it won't, and there are some very real cracks forming in this foundation. Remember how I said we're paying $950 billion in interest? Here's the problem. That number's going up fast, like really fast. And in 2020, our average interest rate on government debt was about 1.6%. Super low. Like, now it's over 3% and climbing. According to projections from the Penn-Wharton budget model, if interest rates stay where they are, we could be paying $1.6 trillion in annual interest by 2030. Do the math with me. Like, our entire federal revenue is about $4.9 trillion per year. If we're paying $1.6 trillion just in interest, That's 33% of all tax revenue going just to service debt, not building anything, not helping anyone, just interest. At some point, and we don't know when, the market's going to say, hey, maybe lending money to a country that can't even control its debt isn't such a great idea. And when that happens, interest rates on US debt go up even more, which makes the problem even worse. It's a death spiral. We're not in it yet, but we can see it from here. That reserve currency cheat code I mentioned, it's not guaranteed forever. According to recent data from the IMF, the dollar's share of global reserves has dropped from about 70% in 2000 to about 59% now. That might not sound like a lot, but the trend is accelerating. China and Russia are actively trying to conduct trade in yuan and rubles. The BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, are discussing creating their own currency for trade. Saudi Arabia is starting to accept payment for oil in currencies other than dollars. Here's what that means for you. If the world stops needing dollars as badly as they do now, all those dollars come flooding back to the US, which means massive inflation. Your $100 bill starts acting like a $50 bill, then a $20 bill. It's not happening overnight, but it's happening. This is the most subtle, but maybe the most dangerous crack. Here's what I mean. If you look at aggregate economic data, things look okay. GDP growth is positive, unemployment is low, stock market's up, but if you actually talk to regular people, they're struggling. According to a 2024 survey by Bankrate, 56% of Americans can't afford a $1,000 emergency expense. Credit card debt just hit a record $1.13 trillion in late 2024, with average interest rates over 22%. But if you depend on a paycheck and don't own significant assets, real wages, adjusted for inflation, have basically been flat. You're working just as hard but falling further behind. This creates political instability, social instability. And historically, that's often what actually triggers economic collapses, not the math, but the social breakdown. All right, so we've covered the situation. Now let's talk about what this means for your money, because that's what actually matters. Here's the thing. You can't control the national debt. You can't control Federal Reserve policy. You can't control whether the dollar stays the reserve currency. But you can control how you position yourself. And positioning yourself correctly is the difference between getting destroyed and potentially thriving in whatever comes next. Look, I know everyone's worried about stock market valuations, and they should be, but here's what you need to understand. In an inflationary environment, which is what we're in, the worst thing you can do is hold cash. Cash loses value every single day. It's guaranteed. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, even with inflation cooling down, we're still running at about 3% annual inflation. That means your $10,000 in a savings account becomes $9,700 in purchasing power next year. You need to own things that hold value. Stocks, even if overvalued, represent ownership in actual businesses that can raise prices. Real estate is land and buildings that people need. Commodities like gold have held value for thousands of years. I'm not saying dump everything into the stock market tomorrow, but you need exposure to real assets. A reasonable target, at least 70 to 80% of your investable assets in stocks, real estate, or other inflation-resistant investments. Remember those credit card statistics I mentioned? Average rates over 22%. Here's the math. If you have $10,000 in credit card debt at 22% interest and you're making minimum payments of like $250 a month, you know how long it takes to pay that off? Over 7 years. And you'll pay more than $11,000 in interest. You'll pay more than double what you originally borrowed. In an unstable economy, debt is a chain around your neck. It limits your options. It makes you vulnerable. If you have high interest debt, that becomes priority number one. Not investing, not saving for a vacation, destroying that debt. Because when things get shaky, and they will, the people with no debt are the ones who survive. This is what most people don't realize. Job security is an illusion. I don't care how stable your job feels right now. According to Bureau of Labor Statistics data, even in a good economy, about 3 to 4 million people lose their jobs every month. Companies restructure, industries change, AI is disrupting everything. You need a side hustle, freelancing, consulting, a small business, something where you control the income and can scale it up if needed. And look, I'm not saying quit your job tomorrow, but dedicate 5 to 10 hours a week to building something else. Because if you lose that job, going from $75,000 a year to zero is catastrophic. Going from $75,000 plus a $15,000 side business to $15,000 is manageable while you find what's next. This seems to contradict what I said about owning assets instead of cash, but hear me out. You need an emergency fund, 3 to 6 months of expenses in cash. That's non-negotiable. But beyond that, if you've got extra savings, consider keeping 10 to 15% in cash or cash equivalents. Why? Just because if things do fall apart, cash becomes king temporarily. Assets go on sale. The people who had cash in 2008 to 2009 got to buy real estate for 40 to 50% off. Stocks for 60% off. The wealth transfer that happened after the 2008 crisis was insane. According to a JP Morgan Chase Institute study, the top 1% increased their wealth by over 80% in the decade after the financial crisis, while the bottom 50% barely moved. You want to be in position to take advantage when everyone else is panicking. So to bring this all back around, why hasn't the economy collapsed yet? Because we've got 3 pillars holding it up: the dollar's reserve status, aggressive Federal Reserve intervention, and normalized chaos that keeps people confident. But those pillars are cracking. The debt spiral is accelerating. The dollar's dominance is eroding. The real economy is splitting between asset owners and everyone else. Does this mean collapse is inevitable? Honestly, I don't know. Nobody does. The Fed might thread the needle perfectly. Technology might create enough productivity growth to solve our problems. We might muddy through for another decade or two. But here's what I do know. The people who win are the ones who prepare for multiple scenarios, who own real assets, who eliminate debt, who build multiple income streams, who keep some dry powder for opportunities, because whether the economy collapses dramatically or just slowly grinds people down over time, those strategies protect you either way. The yet in our title, it might never come, but if it does, you want to be ready. Look, the economy is complex, the future is uncertain, but your personal financial strategy doesn't have to be complicated. Own things that hold value, eliminate what makes you vulnerable, create options for yourself. Do that, and no matter what happens to the broader economy, you're going to be all right. If you found this helpful, hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and drop a comment letting me know. Are you worried about an economic collapse, or do you think we're going to muddy through just fine? I'll see you in the next one.